This is a presentation of OneLogin Training.
Welcome to Implementing SmartFactor Authentication Part 2. Now let's take a look at Smart Flows. Smart Flows basically allow you to enable login flows that do not ask for passwords as one of the first couple of authentication factors. A basic login flow is still the default and prompts for a password as soon as you type in a username, unless you have OneLogin Desktop, which means there's no need for a user to provide username and password because there's a certificate that's used for identity and authentication that's installed along with OneLogin Desktop. The other two flow options basically prompt for MFA first instead of for passwords. And the passwordless one there is true to its name. It doesn't prompt for passwords at all. With the basic Smart Flow, the system looks first for a OneLogin Desktop certificate. If it's present, the desktop cert is used for both user identification and authentication. Thus, no password prompt, no looking for any other certs. If there is no OL Desktop cert present, or it isn't valid, the user is then prompted to provide their password. Then the system checks to see if there's some sort of device cert, if it's required. Next, if Smart Access is enabled and the risk score is above the configured risk level, the login attempt is rejected. Or if Smart MFA is enabled and the risk score is below the configured level, the user isn't prompted for MFA and will get straight in. If the risk score is above the configured level and the user is required to provide MFA, final step before the user gets into the portal is prompt for MFA. They provide, they get in. With the brute force defense smart flow, the process is very similar to that basic flow. The main difference is that the password prompt comes after the MFA prompt. This prevents any cyber attacks that rely on getting a user's password correct by running through a bunch of guesses or known passwords. So the system looks for the OneLogin Desktop cert just as it would have with the basic flow. And again, if the OneLogin Desktop cert is present, no need to check for any other certificate or prompt for the password. If the user is required to have a device cert installed on their system, then that's going to be checked for next. And again, if they have Smart Access enabled and the risk score is high, they're denied access. And if Smart MFA is enabled and the risk score is below the configured level, the user again will not be prompted for MFA. But if the risk score is above the configured level for Smart MFA and the user is required to provide MFA, the user will be prompted for MFA. And the last step, again, as long as OneLogin Desktop's not involved in it, will be to ask for the password. So again, only real difference here in flow is password comes at the end instead of one of the first two steps in the login process. Let's take a look at how that brute force smart flow would look from the end user's point of view. So now we want to check out that brute force defense policy. So that means that we want our user basically to be prompted for MFA first. That means we need a policy enabled with brute force. So we're going to create a new brute force policy here, and we are going to check the little radio button there for brute force defense. Have to require MFA for this guy, so OTP is going to be required. We're going to use OneLogin Protect. It does need to be required for every user at every login. but we cannot prompt them for MFA when they're first logging in because they need MFA in order to log in. We'll talk more about how to set it up so that new users can be assigned to this policy who don't already have MFA registered. But for now, we'll just use it with ransomware because we just want to see how to enable this and what it looks like from the user's point of view. So we've created the new policy. We've made the modifications that we need to make to this policy. We are going to save, able to save successfully. And since we had so much fun torturing my buddy ransomware, we are going to now apply it to him and check it out from his point of view. So we're going to go to his authentication tab. And again, we're just manually changing the security policy there. In real life, better to use mappings and groups to automatically apply the policies. All right, so we've set ransomware up with this new login flow. Let's see what it looks like. Gonna go log in, ransom.where@demo.com, click continue, and ta-da! MFA prompt is first. So we click, we accept, and now we are prompted for the password. That's the idea with the brute force defense flow. MFA comes first, then password. Then they get to log in. The passwordless smart flow just cuts passwords altogether. So other than that, the rest of the flow is, for the most part, the same. Again, OL desktop cert might be checked for first if it's present, or if there is a device cert that's required, it's going to check for that device cert. Again, risk score might come into play if you have enabled smart access, and if the risk score is above the configured risk level, login attempt is denied. Now, one significant difference here, though, is Smart MFA cannot be enabled with the passwordless flow. Why? Because it'd be a really bad idea to bypass MFA when we're not even looking for a password, basically. So you cannot enable Smart MFA with passwordless. So no matter what, users will be prompted for MFA. They provide the required MFA, and they will get in. Other than the rule you cannot enable Smart MFA with passwordless flows, there are a few other requirements, settings that you have to make sure are changed or set in a particular way in order to enable passwordless smart flows. First, maximum password age must be set to 0. No passwords. Then, under MFA device registration, you need to make sure you check the do not prompt users to register an MFA device during login. One of the tricks with passwordless flows as well as brute force defense is how you're going to get those users to register their MFA, but they cannot register it during the first login attempt using this guy because MFA is required first. So we'll talk about some of those options that you have for making sure they do have MFA registered before these flows are applied to them. And last but not least, you must make sure that OTP is required for everyone. So you need to change those enforcement settings to say OTP required for all users. All three of these changes are made to the user policy that has password smart flow enabled to it. Okay, again, maximum password age 0, don't prompt them to register MFA during login, and OTP has to be required for everyone. So let's take a look at how to enable passwordless smart flows, and again, where those configuration changes are located, as well as take a look at what a passwordless login flow might look to an end user. All right, passwordless. What do we want to do? We're going to start off with a policy. This time, radio button is called passwordless. Gonna name it passwordless so remember what this one's supposed to do. And again, a few requirements in order for this to work. Password age, maximum password age has to be set to 0. And of course, we have to require OTP, with at least one factor option, but we cannot prompt the users for MFA during their first login. So let's click save, and oops, we forgot one of those changes. Nice of it to remind us to go down here. OTP is required for all users. Now let's click save. And we were successful. So who are we going to apply this to? Well, our favorite end user of the day is Mr. Ransomware. So let's go on in there, authentication, and choose, instead of brute force, passwordless. Save. All right. So what's it look like for our buddy? Well, he comes in, where at demo.com, clicks continue, going to use OneLogin Protect, accepts the push notification, and voila, look Mom, no passwords. All right, we have successfully logged in with a passwordless flow. This concludes part 2 of implementing SmartFactor authentication. Please continue on to part 3 so you can see how smart hooks are used when you're working with smart flows.
This is a presentation of OneLogin Training.